Welcome to the podcast today. I'm Jim Oliver, your host, and today my co-host, Nick Kosko. Welcome, Nick.
Hey, thanks for having me on again. It's going to be a good conversation.
Absolutely. We're going to talk a little bit today about goals, both financial goals and just how to set goals. And this is a great topic at the end of the year. And we're going to flip it around a little bit today because we're going to let Nick kind of drive the bus today and kind of dictate where this conversation goes. And so take it away, Nick.
Well, this is a really passionate subject of yours, and it kind of got me thinking. I'm like, the one thing that is sometimes a peril is you get to going, when you're passionate about something, it's like you're breathing through your eyelids. You just get to moving. So I thought, I'll be the guy that pumps a brake a little bit sometime and delve in, because I've had the luxury of having a lot of conversations with you about this, but not all of our audience has been able to do that. So I may circle back at times and say, hey, tell more about that.
Okay, awesome.
But I know you've been immensely successful in many things, particularly the financial services business, the last 30 years. And if I'm correct, I think you would give almost all of that credit to getting kind of medieval, working on yourself and that personal development aspect. And I suspect, you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that's where you really develop some very good goal setting habits. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I absolutely, I did. When I was 22 years old, I came from nothing. We had no money, and here I'm in the business of giving people advice about money. And so I had to learn on the fly. It wasn't anything that I had learned from my childhood. And
Yeah.
I found mentors that I could learn from. And that was one really important thing, is I found people that were wealthy, and I talked to them. And I studied them, and I studied books and everything else that I could do to learn how to build wealth and teach other people how to build wealth. And in the beginning of my career, I really went down the wrong rabbit hole, like a lot of people do, is I was a full service financial planner. And it was like this. If somebody would come into my office, and we had really nice offices. I wore a really nice tie, not like the t-shirt I have on today. And I would sit down, and I'd have all kinds of forms and charts and everything else. And if I were talking to you, Nick and Meredith, as I would sit down, and you guys would do a lot of guessing, here's my income, here's how much my income's going to increase over the next 40 years or 30 years or 20 years. And This is what inflation is going to do, and this is the rate of return that we're going to get, and this is what we want to have in post-retirement. And you would guess, I would guess, and then we'd hope together. We always say what?
Hope's not a strategy.
Hope's not a strategy, but that's what financial planning is based on, hope. And here's the other thing that it's based on, is I would come back and say, okay, you guys need to be putting $5,000 a month into these funds. And you'd say, well, we can't put $5,000 a month in there. We can't afford that. And I'd say, okay, well, wait a minute. If I lower inflation, if I increase your rate of return, hey, it's $2,000 a month. Can you do $2,000 a month? And you go, well, yeah, we can do it. Hey, we're going to hit our goals.
Yeah.
Well, that's asinine.
Is that attainable goals? Were those attainable goal setting sessions?
Yeah, it wasn't. Well, they were manipulative goals. They were. What do you want it to look like? And it was a sales technique. Financial planning is all about selling financial instruments.
Yeah,
it's not about your success. It's just not.
So, what did you find? What were some of the tools along the way that you found useful, or techniques that you found useful to kind of break away from that particular financial goal setting model?
Yeah, well, it was a revelation that how much money do you want in retirement?
Yeah, okay.
How much do you want? As much as you can
Oh,
get.
as much as possible.
Right. And do you really want to retire?
Well, not knowing what I know now, because retirement's a dirty word.
Right. Because retirement means to be taken out of service.
Yeah.
Now, I can tell you that when I come to Florida and I spend time with my family in Florida, my wife's from Florida, so she's in her happy spot. Everybody's happy. She could go to the beach every single day, read a book, listen to music, and she could just be there, right?
Yeah.
I can do that for about 3 days in a row. And I need a project. Now, I'm 53 years old. I'm going to need a project 20 years from now. I'm going to need a project 30 years from now. And the good Lord willing, I'm going to need a project 40 years from now.
Sure.
Right? So if I'm going to have a project, then I have to have a game plan for success in that project, which are my goals.
Yeah.
Right?
So you want a purpose. What I just heard you say is that you want purpose, and goal setting is synergistic with having a purpose.
Absolutely. So when I think of goals, I don't write down, I want to make this much money, because
Sure.
that's like, I go back to the Bible, I want to serve these people. The way that I give is I'm giving the knowledge that I've learned the hard way to other people, and the guidance and the coaching, that's what we're giving. That's why we're so passionate about this, is we're giving to them all of the tools that they need to build their wealth, not to build our wealth.
So you mentioned to me that you have kind of 10 bullet points that you go through when it comes time to setting goals. Let's kind of start unpacking those a little bit. We're not going to go too deep into any one thing, but let's start covering those. Let's talk about number one.
So number one is every goal system that I've ever seen, but this is the number one rule: write them down.
Yeah.
There's something magic that when you write it down, that you'll make it happen, right? I think that's even a book: write it down, make it happen. But you have to write it down.
It's interesting you say that, Jim. I remember a good friend of ours, Brett, 15 years ago, he said, "You have a bucket list?" And I said, "Yeah." He goes, "Did you write it down?" And I said, "No, I just carry it around in my head." He goes, "Well, then you'll never do them."
That's right. Yeah, you have to write things down. I mean, that's, the everything that you ever seen, there's a brain to hand connection. Okay, and I'm not a neurologist or anything, but everything that I've read is and I've heard it even said that there's a connection between your thumb and your brain. But as you write things down, it plants in your brain. It plants that goal in your brain, and once it's there, it sticks. It's not a conscious thing; it's really unconscious. Now,
I know I've watched you type, and you're doing this, and that's when I learned why you don't send long emails. But I can type really fast, and I can tell you that my personal experience has been when I carry around my little, my journal, or now I got the iPad where I can write on it. It is a different process, a different mental connection than if I type things. And so I really like these tools, whether it's paper or the new fancy Apple device here, where you can write on the screen and keep notes like that.
Yeah.
There's something to that, what you're saying there. Anything else you want to say on that first one?
No, but I mean, I remember Dan Sullivan says your eyes only see and your ears only hear what your brain is looking for. Does that make sense? Your Absolutely. Eyes only see and your ears only hear what your brain is looking for.
Yeah. It's kind of like if you go buy if I buy a Honda Odyssey.
Yeah.
Well, now all I see is people driving a Honda Odyssey. But before
exactly.
I ever needed a van, I didn't even notice how many there were on the roads.
That's right. Exactly. So
it's pretty funny how it works.
It is really funny. And you're exactly right. That's a great point. When you buy a car, then you see everybody with cars like that. And the other thing that's funny too is when you buy a car. I live in a small community in Dakota Dunes, South Dakota, and when you buy a car, it only takes about a month till somebody has a really similar car, even if your car was really unique back before, because we all drive down this one boulevard and they go, oh, that's really sweet. I'm going to go check out that car. Right. So, and then, so that's number one. That's number one by far. Number two is, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. I said, talk about number two.
Number two. Okay. Number two is make yourself accountable.
Okay.
And the whole thing is that you have to share your goals. This is how you make yourself accountable with your peers, with your family, with your friends, your team. And, you know, that gives you an additional incentive to do what you say you're going to do. And so you have to share it. If somebody says, hey, I'm going to run a marathon, then and you just say it to yourself, it's really easy to quit and go, oh, maybe I'm not going to run that marathon. But if I tell you I'm going to run a marathon, which, by the way, Nick, I'm not telling you that right now, is if I tell you that, then you're going to say, hey, Jim, how's that marathon training going? Oh, well, you know, I had a pizza last night. I don't know if that's carb loading or not.
Hey, you know what you can say, Jim? Because I know you're into biking. You can just say, every day I did a marathon.
That's right. That's right. Now, by the way, I can ride my bike 26.2 miles.
That's right. You can start saying that. So I like what you're saying about this, about the accountability.
Yeah.
I remember my pastor sharing with us that he and his wife go and have a goal setting date at the beginning of the year. That's awesome. They share these goals with each other, and they kind of come with homework. And they're one of those couples that I look at and I'm like, oh, you guys are doing things the right way. And so I remember asking, I was like, hey, what are some of your techniques? And that was one of them. And so Mary and I did that this past year. And it's really good because if I've got goals that I want to achieve, but they're not, there's no synergy with her and the needs that she has, well, that's first and foremost a problem. But also, like you said, I need the accountability to make sure that I'm doing the things. It's like, you and I just sat down and did our business goals for 2019. What do we want to cover? So I've shared that with you. You shared those things with me. And sometimes is this reasonable? Is my thought process reasonable, realistic? You know, we both have done that heritage profile through the Buffini company. And really great thing. But one thing that I learned about myself is the Olympian. And I know I've got a couple of friends that are like this. And the problem is we'll write things so big and go all out in just a couple weeks and then realize they almost get burned out. Like, so understanding that. So having an accountability partner where we can be reasonable with them as well. Like, I find a lot of value in that.
Yeah. It's got to be somebody you trust, just like you said, and respect, because you can trust somebody, but if they don't know what you're doing, then, you know, like if you wanted to run a marathon and you say, okay, Jim, help me, hold me accountable, and you trust me, but you probably don't respect my knowledge of running a marathon, and you'd be right to not do that. Right. So that's number two, really, really important. Number three is you have to visualize your accomplishing that goal vividly. Okay. So let me give you an example of this. Back when, in my 20s, I went to I was in Denver, Colorado, and Parker, Colorado, more specifically. And I went to like one of the brand new neighborhoods that had a house that was like my dream home at the time. And I went in and I started to build with the salesperson this house. So I picked out what model I wanted. I picked out what colors I wanted. I picked out in my mind how the furniture would be laid out. Whose bedroom is this? You know, is this my daughter's bedroom? Is this my son's bedroom? You know, what would the backyard look like? I visualized the dog in the backyard and what other things we would do. I visualized playing catch with my son in the backyard. And all of these things, I made it as much detail as I could imagine. That this is where imagination, you know, and I love that when Nelson Nash talks about infinite banking on page 14, he talks about imagination is the most important thing. And I think that what he's saying is to accomplish this, you have to be able to imagine it. You have to be able to visualize it. And it's no different than, you know, Jason Day, who closes his eyes and watches his shot before he's even got up there to hit it in golf, is he's closing his eyes, he's visualizing it. You have to be able to do this. Yeah. And you have to do it on a regular basis once you're started. Because if you're going to get up tomorrow morning and run 10 miles at 5 a.m. and you go to bed and you visualize what your goal is, which is to run that marathon or whatever it is, you're going to be a lot more apt to get up and do it rather than if you just go, oh, gosh, if I visualize staying in bed and being warm and sleeping in, that's what I'm going to get.
Sure.
So I'm either going to visualize getting my goal or I'm going to visualize not getting my goal, and I will get both of those. And excuse me, when you think back to one of the most basic, other than the Bible, the most basic personal development book, or the original development book, is James Allen, As a Man Thinketh. Right? And by the way, if you haven't read that book, it's 27 pages. You have no excuse. Go get it, read it, do it. Okay? But you have to think and visualize what you want.
Yeah, it's you equated this one time to me, and I liked it like this. I had to create the space in my mind for that to be present, to actually come to life.
Yeah.
And by doing that, that was how I liked that. Like, hey, let's just, we're a financial podcast, so we'll just say it like this. Hey, I've never been able to, maybe I could never have fathomed making $10 million in a year.
Right.
And if that became something that I wanted, but I didn't create the space in my mind, then there's no way it would ever happen.
Right.
And so it kind of goes hand in hand with what you're talking about, what I hear.
Yeah. And, and again, what it is why do you want $10 million a year?
Yeah. Yeah.
Sometimes people make $10 million a year and they don't know why, and they just are, say they're a football player, a baseball player. They don't know what that $10 million is for. Yep. So they do what? They spend it. Yeah. And that's why they're broke within 4 years after they get out of a professional sport. Yep. Is because that's not what that $10 million is for. If you made $10 million a year, I know you, Nick, you would say, how do I help other people with this $10 million? Right? Yeah. So that's really important. You're right. It's absolutely important, but you have to be able to see it. So then the fourth one is you got to choose your words carefully as you write them down. And now this is from Dan Sullivan, and what he's saying is that your goals set a direction for your efforts.
Okay.
Think about that. That's a really cool sentence that he says, because goals are about articulating your desires and telling yourself where you're headed.
Can you say the first sentence again for everyone?
Yeah. A goal helps you set a direction for your efforts.
Yeah.
So that's why you have to choose these words carefully.
And when you're writing them down, it's okay to erase it and
absolutely
come back and clarify that.
Or rewrite it.
I like that.
Clarify it, mold it. It's kind of like we talk about what God does with people is like a silversmith is a silversmith would have this big vat of silver that had all these impurities in it, and he would heat it up and sift off the impurities until he could see his reflection in it. Yeah. Right. So our goal setting is like that too. There's going to be some things that don't work. There are going to be some things that we decide really aren't that important, that we're really not willing to sacrifice and work towards. And as we do that and sift it off, it'll become clearer and clearer and clearer, and we'll get that vision.
Yeah, I think that's really good. So let's go on to the next one.
Okay, so number 5 would be set a realistic time frame. Now, Tony Robbins, I love when he says people underestimate or overestimate what they can do in a year, and they underestimate what they can do in 10.
Yeah.
What that says to me is, Dan Sullivan says it a little bit differently. He says there's no such thing as an unrealistic goal, just too short of a time frame or an unrealistic deadline. And he says something along those lines that you could have anything you want, but just know that some things take time, right?
So how do you overcome that?
Well, you have to set a deadline for tasks. So when we look at a strategy circle, again, this is a Dan Sullivan thing, is that the task has a deadline. The goal has a goal and a time frame and a deadline for that. But again, Dan says a goal without a deadline is just a slogan. You know what I mean? Right? So you have to have a deadline, but it has to be realistic in a realistic time frame. Like you couldn't say, hey, I want to lose 30 pounds in the next 2 weeks.
Yeah, so you'd have to back to, kind of partnering with an accountability person. If I was going to do that, then I'd need to talk with someone who's an expert in that field to say,
That's
hey,
right.
is this realistic? And what are the steps I'm going to take to do this? Setting realistic things like that. Like if I want to, accumulate $500,000 this year.
Yeah.
Is that realistic if I'm only making 250,000?
Right. So absolutely. So if I came to a life coach, a health coach, and said, I want to lose 20 pounds in the next 2 weeks, they would say, well, that's not realistic. They would say, no, or 30 pounds in the next 2 weeks. They'd say, you can lose 30 pounds, no problem. But let's talk about how to do it healthy. Let's talk about how not to set yourself up for disaster or failure, right?
Yeah.
So the sixth thing, and I think this is really important, is there are going to be surprises, right? There are going to things that happen on the way to achieving this specific goal. Again, let's go with the marathon. Well, if I were going to run a marathon and I was going to go from a couch to the marathon, there would probably be a 5K in there. There'd probably be a 10K in there. There would be a half marathon.
Sure.
And you know what? I'd probably start feeling better. I'd probably start, my clothes would start fitting differently. There's going to be all these things. And sometimes these things that you go along, those are more important than the original goal.
Yeah, maybe even a little injury in there. Like, how am I going to overcome?
That's right.
Overcome that, like mental, those obstacles. Obstacles, sometimes can mask themselves as or opportunities can mask themselves as obstacles. Absolutely.
So when you're striving to reach a goal, one thing leads to another, which leads to another, and like you might go to the doctor while you're training for this marathon, and they say, "Hey, your cholesterol is better than it's ever been. Your blood pressure is great." It could be all of these other benefits that you're getting as you go towards that ultimate goal, which, in that example is the marathon.
Yeah. All right. So what's next?
So, and by the way, so the next thing is something that you and I talk about all the time, is you got to take ownership of your future.
You mean no one else is to blame?
No one else is to blame. If you don't run that marathon, it's not the shoes. It's not your wife that didn't let you get up at 5 a.m. that day because she had the flu. There are no excuses.
That's right.
Okay. So you are 100% in charge, owner. You have to take ownership. And I know that great book is Extreme Ownership. It helps in marriages. It helps in business. It helps when you're talking to yourself, because we're the greatest salespeople of all times when we're talking to ourselves. We can convince ourselves of anything. Right?
You know what? I think that, we have a lot of people listening here with kids and whatnot, and I have found the Extreme Ownership guys, Jocko Willink and Leif Babin, they've got a couple kids books. And you talk about, when you're dealing with discipline in the home, trying to mold these little people. I just wasn't given that as a kid in such a direct way. I know that excuses weren't really tolerated. And I clearly remember some pivotal moments in my teenage years being told that it's my responsibility, and especially, playing sports and stuff in high school. But these kids' books and the way that we've pivoted as parents here in this house, well, with those books, the Way of the Warrior Kid books, I really recommend anybody that's got kids, get those, read them to your kids. I've listened to them on Audible. We're doing that right now. And what I found is that they're great parenting books.
Right.
As well. And so while we talk a lot about business, that book has just really become important. And I appreciate that you turned me onto that last February of 2017. I just let somebody borrow the book, and I opened the cover to see if my name was in it. And I saw that I'd written the date as well that I got it. So
nice. That's awesome.
It's really good.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. No, it's a great book. And I think that's so important because, Dan Sullivan, he says, if you don't take ownership, that your future is your property. And if you don't take ownership of it, other people would be happy to do it. Right. And so, right. We talk about this all the time. So think about when you're controlling your wealth building, if you don't want to take control of it and take ownership of it, there are a lot of people out there that'd be happy to do it. That's
right. So what's the answer that you always get when you ask somebody, well, what does your 401k and all that cost?
They don't know.
They have no idea. Has anyone ever answered the question correctly?
Not taking ownership, right?
That's right. Taking ownership. And what's that cost? What's it cost to give over ownership? And people have no idea the answer.
That's right. And so then you can't, if you don't know, then you can't answer the question that Nelson always talks about, is if you knew what was happening, you'd know what to do. But you haven't taken ownership to know what's happening.
Yeah.
Right? And which is sometimes, by the way, we help people learn that they got to do that. And, so, all right. So number 8, because we could probably have a whole podcast on that one.
Absolutely. Let's get on with it.
Yeah. Number 8 is, Tony Robbins says this the best is, can I? Constant and never-ending improvement. It's a learning process.
Yeah.
Right? Having a goal is a learning process. Now, at the end, there's no firing squad that you have to face if you don't hit it. So, it's not an end result. It's always going. It's always moving. Right now, again, you could probably see a theme here. Dan Sullivan says that we live in the gap, which means we measure to perfection. Like we're trying to travel to the horizon, which we can't because it keeps moving.
Sure.
So we plan forward, but we measure back.
Yeah, great.
So if your goal was to make $10 million a year and you made 9, you'd say, well, I failed. Right? But where'd you come from? How far have you come?
Sure.
That's the constant and never-ending improvement, and that make it enjoyable. The journey is the fun part, right? There's no destination for life on this earth where it's just, oh man, I made it. I've got everything that I could ever possibly want. I've got it all. That's not there. There's no place for that. It's always moving.
What do you think is the biggest obstacle to people pursuing improvement all the time?
I think it's because they think that they think contentment means that I've made it, that there's some special place that I can just turn it off.
Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, and I don't know if it's laziness or if it's just not understanding that the journey can be fun. The journey can be enjoyable to where it just goes on forever.
I hear a lot people being afraid of failure.
Right.
And it's okay. It's like I loved reading one time that Jeff Bezos lost $100 million in various business ventures before he struck it with Amazon.
Yeah.
It goes on all the time. Like, oh, well, I want to, take riding a bike. How many times did you fall down before you finally were able to zip down the driveway the first time?
If you think about it with anything, like when when you hit a golf ball,
Yeah,
right? But then 1 out of 10, you hit just perfect and you think, oh my gosh, that's it. That's what I need to do, right? And and you learn more from your failures, obviously, than you do your successes. Is pain is a great teacher. Pleasure doesn't teach you anything, right? Pain will always teach you. So your failures, your pain, they will help correct your course.
Absolutely.
And it's okay. It's okay. Again, it's kind of like God throws adversity at us to build us, to mold us. And the same thing happens in our goals. Is those little failures will help you achieve your goal.
Yeah. Go. Don't be afraid to put yourself out there. Don't be afraid to stumble, fall down. I love the saying that I believe you introduced me to was, adversity introduces a man to himself.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
when you're
We
doing
can make that, because that was written a long time ago. So we can make it adversity introduces a person to themselves, because it's and as a man thinketh. If you're a woman, just put as a woman thinketh, because
Sure.
but the adversity will teach you about yourself and what needs to change for you to get stronger and for you to get better and you to get all of the things that you want, right?
Sure.
So the ninth thing is really important, because you gotta surround yourself with like-minded people and successful people. So it could be a mastermind. It could be just other people that you share your goals with and they share their goals with you, right?
Sure.
Because they'll share strategies and lend support, and they'll they see the future and they want things just like you do.
Yeah.
So if, back to our marathon analogy, if we had all of these other people that were going to run a marathon, then that would help us stay in the right frame of mind. And people would say, oh, you know what, you got, like you said, you got that injury on your ankle. Here's what I did. I took a few days off. I rested it and I elevated it. And then I cut my running down to half for a week, whatever it is, whatever the strategy is. So they understand how you feel. They felt the same way. And here's a strategy they found to overcome that.
Sure.
So that community is really, really important. So
I think it is, I believe it was Darren Hardy that said it, maybe Zig Ziglar, somebody like that, is, you're the sum of the 5 people you spend the most time with.
Absolutely.
But it's noise too. We talk about financial noise all the time, and turning off the noise of the relationships. Hey, you may need to prune some relationships in your life, and it's not necessarily going to be easy.
That's right.
But the negative Nellies in your life are not helping you at all.
No, they will hold you back. And you know what? It's our minds are really interesting and funny, because somebody could say, you could be, let's say you're losing weight and somebody says to you, oh, and you say, I've lost 10 pounds. And they go, really? Because you don't look like you have. Right. Or they say, really? Like they're shocked that, so there's little things that derail us. That's just one little one that I can think of, is that, or somebody says, oh, it's the noise, right?
Yeah.
That noise can derail you. Sure. So you have to have, if you have noise over here, you have to have reinforcement over here. It's just like when we're trying to teach somebody to change their paradigm about building wealth. If all they do is they listen to us and they get it all straightened out and they know their path, and then they just start watching YouTube videos of certified financial planners and how they're going to help you become wealthy, which is a lie, that's noise. Then they come back and say, well, why was I going to do this? Like they forget. So that's why that community is so important.
Yeah. All right. So we're coming up on on our timeline here, and I
Yeah.
know you got one more for sure that we want to share. So why don't
One
you go on
more,
to the
and
last
that's balance, which means set goals in all areas of your life. You can't be just mono-focused on, like, I just want to make money. That's all I want to do. Because here's what's going to happen is you'll probably get that goal, but then your marriage is going to be in trouble. Your relationship with your children are going to be in trouble. And this balance and setting goals in all areas of your life is really, really important.
Yeah.
Because most things that are out of balance do what? They crash, right?
Sure. Yeah, I think they all tie together really well. I like the balance component. You know, I use my close friends and most importantly my wife in that to tell me when I'm out of balance,
Yeah.
because I'm not going to recognize it usually very well quickly. So doing that. But another thing is, we touched on it a little bit earlier, but having a strong why helps one set great goals. Simon Sinek wrote the book Start With Why, and if you don't want to read the book, he's got a great TED Talk on this, and I would encourage anyone to go and pull up that TED Talk and look at why, because when you're setting these goals, a lot of times it's asking why 7 levels deep to
Yeah.
get to a very specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-based goal that we can go at and achieve and celebrate the victory at the end.
Absolutely. I mean, and you know, I love that book, and I love the TED Talk too. Is why? Why do you want something? And I do that with my 10-year-old. I do that with my other children. Is why?
Yeah.
And the answers are kind of funny sometimes.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I can't give my wife or my kids or my business partners what they need if I don't understand that simple question.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. What's motivating them? Hey, we're gonna wrap it up here. Jim, I appreciate you sharing the insight of a lot of years of personal development, how you've been so successful at sharing goals. And any last tidbit you'd like to leave our audience with?
Just hang in there. When you're doing this and you're writing them down and you hit a roadblock and you're starting your goal, is hang in there. Don't quit. Just persistence is everything. And so if you don't quit, you can't lose. If you don't quit, it's just changing your time frame. You're still, if it's that $10 million and you aren't there, then it's just change your time frame. Don't quit. Keep going. That's the number one thing.
Well, we just want to thank everybody for joining us. We've been obviously we've been working at this for a few months. That was one of the goals we had for 2018, was to launch the podcast to better leverage our time, to serve others, to share things. And we're gonna improve on this in 2019 and have a tremendous amount of value-added guests on here, bring clients on, and where they're going to share their message, whether it's their goals, what they're working at, their techniques for building wealth. And just want to wish everyone a happy new year, a safe new year, and we look forward to having you on 2019.
Absolutely. Thanks, Nick.
Thank you all.